It's a new day and I'm really excited to start knitting. So let's see how much I can get done. So I'm going to cast on 126 stitches of 1 by 1 rib. And that's about it for today. I'm going to do the cast on row attention 2. Every time I use the plating feeder and I'm casting on a rib, I usually just keep the 2 yarns together for the first row, as usually some of the needles will not pick up one of the yarns, and instead of having to deal with that, I'm just going to put the yarns together and then I'm going to separate them for the next row. I'm going to add a couple of weights. And now for the circular rows, I'm going to leave the wool in the main feeder. And the cotton will go into the secondary one. And I'm going to need the tubular rows attention 4. For the 1 by 1 rib, I'm going to use tension 6. And I'll be knitting a total of 7 rows because I want my carriage to end up on the left side so I can use the transfer carriage. For the 7th row, I'm going to increase the tension slightly on my ribber bed. And we are ready now for the magic using the transfer carriage. You're currently looking at my biggest project of 2024. I'm going to move my sinker plate to the single bed one. Not forget to put my tension to 10. I will remove my weights. And we'll knit 1 row. Every single time I choose to not do the design on the back of the garment just to make the process a bit quicker, every single time I regret that choice. So I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to do the stitch on the back as well. So I'm sure it will be totally worth it, even though it will take me so much longer. So I knitted the first row and I'm ready to begin transferring to begin the stitch. It took me a couple of days, but I managed to get to row 166, and I'm now ready to start shaping the neckline. I've got here my knitting plan. So for the back, I know that I have to cast off 36 stitches in the very center, and I have to decrease. My baby woke up. I'll be back. All right, here we go again. So I know that I have to cast off 36 stitches in the very center, and I have to decrease 7 stitches on either side of the neckline in 18 rows. I will first set my row counter to 0. I'm going to pick up the float of the ladders that I had from my stitch for all the stitches where I'm going to cast off and where I'm going to begin shaping. So these are the 36 stitches that I have to cast off, and normally when we do a neckline we have to do it one side at a time, and I'm going to begin with the left side, so the side where my carriage is. And then when I'm going to cast off, I'm going to catch that so I don't have the space anymore. I'm going to put on hold all the stitches that I need to cast off in the center. So that's 36 plus half. I'm going to continue with this stitch for this section here. I'm already crossing these stitches, so when I'm going to continue with this side, it's already done. We'll continue with the stitch on this section as well. And I will do my first decrease, so I'm going to transfer stitches to shape. I'm going to use my 3-prong tool, and I'm going to transfer 3 stitches at once to decrease 1 stitch. Since I'm going to set my carriage to hold, I'm going to make sure that these needles here where I'm crossing, I'm going to push them back into upper working position to ensure that they're knitting. So I'm going to knit the first row. We'll do the second decrease. Knit 1. I'm continuing with my stitch. I will do my third decrease. Just a reminder, we have to decrease on row 0, 1, 2, 4, 6, 10, and 14. I'm now on row 2, I'm decreasing my third stitch. And now to finish off, I'm just going to place the floats onto my needles, and I will knit my last 4 rows. As we know that we have to knit 18 rows in total. I'm not going to do anything for these, so I'm going to just knit 4 rows. Maybe I'll do the stitch actually. Alright, so we're back on row 14. I'm going to continue with my stitch. Row 16 and 2 more rows. Row 18. And now, before I start to cast off, I'm going to place the floats onto the empty needles. I'm going to do a chain stitch cast off, so I'm going to first manually knit a loose row. I always like to leave some longer tails in case I want to use these to do my seams. We'll see later on. Okay, so now I'm going to use my latch tool. And I will do a chain stitch cast off. There we are, and we finished half. Yeah, I think doing the stitch all the way to the top was a good idea. Moving on to the other half, I'm going to first cast off the 36 stitches in the center. I will do the same technique. I'm going to manually knit a loose row and then do a chain stitch cast off. Now that I cast off all the stitches, all I have to do is to shape the other side, and I'm going to do the exact same decreases as I did on the other side. I'm going to remove my comb now. Always put your wire back. Ooh, exciting! Oh my goodness. I can now take my carriage from holding position. And again, using my 3-prong tool, I'm going to do the first decrease. And you can see why crossing my stitches earlier is going to help me now, as I don't have to worry about that now. I can just put my needles into work, and I will knit the first row. I'm going to make sure to put my carriage back to 0, and we have to again knit 18 rows. It's looking good, yes. The back is now finished, and I'm just measuring to get an idea on the size of it, even though I only steam block it at this point, and these are not the final measurements. It seemed to be off by quite a lot, so I decided to wet block it and see the final measurements. As if you remember from the first video, my intention was that I wanted to make this cardigan a little bit oversized. I'm using warm water and a delicate washing liquid, and I had to wash it a couple of times just to remove the oils from the wool. I rinsed and soaked it in water with a little bit of conditioner as well. To remove the excess water, I squeezed it a few times in a couple of towels, and this way it will dry a bit quicker. When blocking it, I stretched it so that it matched the measurements I initially had on my sketch, which was 50 centimeters long and 50 centimeters wide, and the neckline was 20 centimeters wide and 12 centimeters deep. I was happy with the back measurements in the end, so I continued knitting a front panel and a sleeve. I don't know if I'm the only one, but every time I make anything, I have to pin the garment multiple times and try it on just to check the fit of it before moving on further in the process. From this first fit check, with the back being blocked only, it seemed that the cardigan might be a little bit tighter than I initially planned, but it didn't bother me as much as it did actually fit quite nicely. However, I realized that no matter how much I would stretch the sleeve, it would probably not be the length that I need it to be. So the sleeve is too short. Having blocked the back gave me a more accurate idea on how many rows I would need for the sleeve. So I did some measuring and some calculating, and I decided to reattach the sleeve back on the machine. And I continued with 56 more rows. The sleeve is now a total of 193 rows. And I also increased every 13 rows for the last part, which added 4 more stitches on both sides. This also gave me a couple of extra centimeters in the width. I will share in the last video of this series what I think it went wrong or what mistakes I made, so that you hopefully will not have to make them too. Moving on to the front panel, I cast on in the same way as the back and knitted 140 rows till the point where I had to start shaping the neckline. I am now on row 140 of my second front panel. I finished one panel, so I finished the left side and now I'm knitting the right side. So that means that I have to cast off stitches on the left side of my machine. For this panel, I had to cast off stitches on the right side. So I knitted 141 just so I can bring my carriage and my yarn to the right side. And all I have to do now is to cast off my 13 stitches. Just as a little reminder, here is the shaping of the neckline for the front panel, and I know that on row 0 I have to cast off 13 stitches, and then I have to decrease 12 more stitches to shape the curve. So I'm going to set my row counter to 0 and cast off my 13 stitches. When it comes to the positioning of the stitch on the front panel, all I did was to make sure that the side where my side seams with the back, I just wanted to make sure that I have the same number of stitches there. For my back I had here 5 stitches, and now I have the same. So they're just nice and even, and then whatever was left on the left side, I left it like that, and actually it's not pretty far off. We have 4 stitches here. So I'm going to place my float onto my empty needle, and just like I did for my bag, I'm going to manually knit a long stitch for 13 of these needles, and then I'm going to do a chain stitch cast off. My carriage is on the left side, so it's on the side where I'm going to start to cast off. By starting to cast off on the same side where my yarn and carriage is, I don't have to actually snap my yarn and use another end to do this cast off, and this way we just have a neater finish. And again, using my latch tool, I'm going to do a chain stitch cast off. At this point, I'm actually going to remove my comb. We'll make sure to place some weights. We'll set my row counter to 0. And from now, all I have to do is to decrease 12 stitches. And I have some every 1 row, some every 2, and some every 4. And I know for the neckline I have to knit a total number of 44 rows. From here I'm going to decrease every 2 rows. And from row 24, I will knit straight until row 44. I actually missed one decrease because on row 0 I cast off those 13 stitches instead of doing a decrease, but that's fine. Instead I decreased 9 stitches, which is absolutely fine. It's not going to make a huge difference. So just so you know, for future reference, row 0 is actually the row where we cast off, but I completely forgot.